120% のポテンシャルを引き出すに至る。
Jump Kaisen is one of the most important mechanics in JJK. Before I get too ahead of myself, why jump to conclusions when you could just jump in? From the first jumping to the last, and all those important in between, me and Dice take a look at the jumpings and how they recontextualize the themes and what's important in the story as well as Yuji's journey. Make sure to comment your favorite Jump Kaisen moment down below, and don't forget to check out Dice's channel. And while I got you here, I might as well remind you to hit the subscribe button for my channel. Appreciate it and enjoy. Jujutsu Jumpings, the maiden voyage jumping of Mahito versus Yuji and Nanami. This is where this shit was born. From the choreography and just like the way to like the moments, I think, you know, Yuji overcoming like having to kill that idol transfigured child, lands on Mahito and they start beating the piss out of him. That's gotta be like the iconic like thing to, you know, really cement itself in the series like of jumpings, because Mahito's face is so funny, him just getting his ass beat and he's just like trying to lock in, and it's like once he locks in, you know, he flips the script. But how'd you feel about that one?
Yeah, man, I mean, I'm right with you as far as like it becoming that first iconic moment in regards to like Jump Kaisen. At least in my personal experience, it's the first meme that I remember kind of being all over the place, like just everywhere really, in terms of you know, the voiceover, like fight back, and yeah, I think that's, you know, it's definitely like, I'm not sure if it's what started it all, but it definitely became.
And you know, there's like parts in this fight that I think good through points that, you know, for Yuji character specifically, and like where he his journey takes him and where he ends. The fact of him like not being familiar or like coming from a jujitsu background benefited him in this fight, because no like sorcerer in their right mind would break into a domain to save their homie. You know, that's what they mean by like the selfish sorcerers are the successful ones. But like Yuji, he doesn't, you know, he knows what a domain is because Gojo taught him, but he doesn't have that like ingrained like fear of domain expansions like sorcerers do.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like Yuji being an outsider definitely gives him the edge, because he doesn't like it, you know, is it safe to say like he doesn't have that, I don't know if like he doesn't have that respect for the world because he didn't like really like come up in it, or like we also know that Yuji's been innately strong like all his life, right? So like he knows that he can withstand it, right? And he doesn't have that natural fear because again, he just didn't come up in that world. And yeah, I just think that that fight in general as well, it's very interesting because it's also the first time, you know, aside from what we had seen with Gojo, that Yuji is learning in the middle of the fight, right? And like Jump Kaisen becomes part of Yuji's, it's the first time that we see it become part of Yuji's growth as a sorcerer. It's not just, you know, like a meme, but the first time we kind of see that it's with Nanami and we see him like just taking that first step into growing as a sorcerer.
Yeah, no, those are really good points. You know, Yuji, you mentioned Yuji has always been strong. You know, how Sukuna is like was depicted in the Heian era, you know, when we saw him in the Yorozu flashback, he looked, you know, disinterested, bored, disconnected. And when they showed Yuji in the flashback, back when Ren Amai or whatever his name is, the sweets guy, the sugary guy, he, in that flashback, of like the bullies that he was hanging with, Yuji just has that same like disinterested face. In his world, like no one can like really harm him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, that's like another through point for Yuji of like his type of character, that he is strong. His grandpa's words stick with him and he proves it, like he stands on business and he shows it. And I think this is a very good fight to like showcase that we could believe his conviction. You had another good point about like Jump Kaisen being, you know, a part of the way the series develops Yuji, because Nanami is like the very like good first like foothold. Like Gojo shows him things, but we know Gojo's not a great teacher. Nanami is like his first like, you know, true teacher. And then seeing how like his training, helping him out, how that does elevate to the next level with our next jujitsu jumping of Hanami versus Yuji and Todo. Because this is where Todo like uses Jump Kaisen essentially to really like level Yuji up a notable bit,
This is like where Todo gets to shine as well in terms of what he means as a character for Yuji, and again Yuji's growth, because you do bring up a good point in terms of how he takes the idea of, again, Jump Kaisen to the next level. He literally backs off of the fight and tells Yuji, you land a black flash or I'm not
run
joining
them ones
you.
Run them ones.
And he's asking it like that's nothing, right? Like that's something that any sorcerer would do. Like looking back at it, if we thought it was crazy at the moment, it's even crazier after you really realize the legacy of Black Flash and really what it takes, right? Obviously Yuji is him, but at that point we didn't know, right? But Todo, with his big brain or whatever, like he saw the same thing in Yuji that Gojo saw, that Nanami saw, and he forced him to take that next step. And maybe this is me looking too much into it, but I think part of the idea that we see there is that you also have to be able to hold your own. In the jumping, everybody has to play their part, and I think that's kind of from a different angle we see that in terms of Yuji being able to elevate himself to earn Todo's assistance.
With Todo backing off of the fight and letting him run the ones, that is giving Sukuna vibes. Sukuna says Todo is like a jujitsu sorcerer. He's the one person he didn't want to show up. And I think this is why. It's that ego. It's that like sense of self, we talk about a lot with JJK. And, this jujitsu jumping so special because it builds the brotherhood, best of friendos, which is hella important for Yuji to overcome his arch nemesis, but we'll get to that one in a little bit. Because now we have something on the flip side, right? A jujitsu jumping, but now it's the bad guys jumping Gojo.
Yeah, this is very interesting because talking about Jump Kaisen, I don't really think a lot about the villains besides, Sukuna in the against Gojo, right? Like that's been memed to death. Yeah, you almost, at least again, personally, I get so caught up in the good guys having to team up to get the job done that you kind of forget that, the good guys, got Gojo. We don't really see him go all out because we learn later what an all-out Gojo looks like, but it's definitely where we see Feral Gojo for the first time, and we notice that he definitely has a couple of levels to go up to, like it takes quite a lot to get him riled up.
We were seeing the tip of the iceberg of his like ability and powers, and we were like, all of us watching and reading were like thoroughly impressed by Gojo's performance here. And he still flexes and takes his limitless down as well. Like he's like literally about that action. And it's funny that Jump Kaisen is so important to like the fabric of JJK that even the villains have to do it, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at least off the top of my head, it's the first time that it kind of feels like the aggressors regret the jumping, right? Because Gojo, like he like, bro, he's on one. Like he goes to another level, and when, especially when he kills Hanami, you can just see Jogo, like they were not ready. Like at one point they're even like, oh, you think you can run away, I think is what they say. And then, Gojo's like, what? Like, are you seriously think that like I'm trying to run away or whatever? I'm it's obviously not what he said. I'm completely paraphrasing here. But I just think it's crazy the fact that I think it's the only time that the jumping, it doesn't really, go as
pan
planned,
out.
right?
Yeah, they lost the jumping, but the plan was a success because they trapped him. It's like Kenjaku didn't tell the disaster curses what the real plan was. He was like, yeah, I think y'all got him. Y'all got the hands. And knowing damn well they was about to get packed up, and then he could just like throw the prison realm down. That dude, right? He's like waiting for that domain to be popped.
Yeah, that's another level of jumping from Kenny's part.
Yeah, like he's jumping ideologies. Now this one's not a huge jumping, but I think it was fun seeing Yuji and Megumi jump Awasaka. It's kind of like Naruto and Sasuke, but Megumi is smart enough to be able to like work with Yuji's like physical like ability. It maybe would have like focused on a bit is like the reasons why Megumi and Yuji work so well as a team, and the reasons why Todo and Yuji work so well as a team. If you read the story and you care about it, it'll come through. It bleeds through for sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm with you, man. We definitely don't get enough of that duo, and it's the brains and the bronze, and yeah, it's definitely tough for Megami to keep up from a physical standpoint, but I just think they work so well together because, like I said, Megami's like the brain, but at the same time, nobody can match Yuji's physicality, and as a duo, I just think it's criminal that we didn't get, more because there's so much to do there. And like you said, it's so different. Every duo and the team ups that we get, they're all so different. And I do think Gege does a good job of highlighting how that's so. But I just would have loved to still get more.
Yeah, it's like Megami kind of like uses Yuji kind of like a chess piece. You know what I mean? He puts
Yeah,
Yuji in a position the best place to, but with Todo's like taking the restrictions off of Yuji and letting Yuji go wild, and he has a curse technique perfect to like sync up with it. You know what I mean? And Yuji has like the physicals to be able to handle getting swapped and continue his like fighting. He has that prowess. So only
yeah,
he could. People forget that like Yuji's like really the only one that would be able to. Well, Gojo obviously, but like really out of the people left in a situation, the Vibra slap, no one would be able to like withstand that kind of like constant swapping in that short time frame. Besides Yuji and Sukuna, you know what I mean?
yeah, that's true. Yeah, definitely. Only Yuji would be able to be used like that. And you said the Megami using Yuji as a chess piece, and it's so accurate because we've seen like Maki use him like a cursed tool, like a weapon. So like it's
Literally.
yeah, it's so interesting how like depending again what the team up is, how the dynamic works. And again, it makes sense because we know Megami he strategizes, that's his whole thing. So it makes sense that with Yuji he would put him in positions to succeed. With Maki, she's not a sorcerer, so she needs a weapon, right? And Yuji's built like a weapon, like
Yuji's
he's
the best
literally
curse object in the series.
yeah, so credit to that.
This is kind of funny, right? So this is where jumpings go really wrong. Dagon versus Naobito, Nanami, Maki, Megami. They couldn't win with all those numbers, so Megami's dad came in to put the belt to ass. But it's crazy that Dagon was really like just duking it out and winning.
Yeah, they were fighting for their lives, and
Hmm.
Dagon was on one, after the Hanami's death. It felt like he was in a position where he just wasn't gonna lose, right? Yeah, I think that like my biggest takeaway from this from this team up and failed jumping is pretty much that, right? The fact that like it shows that it doesn't always work out, and like there is such a thing where like your opponent is just too strong, right?
You made a really good point though, because the genius of JJK Kogai, the grasshopper curse that Yuji fights. Yuji is just so far above Kogai that because at the end Kogai tries to like do a little trick, like a secret like little tail or something like that, and then the narrator just says, "But if the skill gap is too great, no cheap trick will catch you off guard." It's something along those lines. I think that's a really good point you mentioned. But then after that jumping, we get the one that elevated everything. Mahito versus Yuji and Todo. There's so much in that fight. Like I think it's it's a top 3 fight in JJK for me.
Yeah, everything about that fight, because Mahito definitely deserves some credit too for, I always like to give the villains credit when heroes have to step their game up, and in that like scene, like in that moment, Todo had to pull up. Like Todo pulling up there was everything, and what they're able to accomplish together, and even how like Mahito, the sort of resistance that Mahito puts up, because Todo, we know he doesn't leave that fight unscathed. We know everything that Yuji has to put into that fight for them to even have a chance at winning. I don't know if it would be wrong to say that it's the first time that it really feel like you really feel the fruits of the jumping.
Yeah, you're cooking with that one. I never really looked at it like that, but that's what it is. It's the first payoff of our jujitsu jumpings. What we've been like all the hard work, effort, the loss is like accumulated to this, and Yuji just caps it off perfectly with "I'm you." This jumping tells a story. You know, Yuji was broken when Todo came back. That black flash of Yuji joining up in that teardrops, dude, that scene is like everything to me in the anime.
Yeah, no, I think in both I know the anime just elevates it, like an anime should, but I think in both the manga and in the anime, the whole fight, the whole sequence is just it's executed so well because yeah, like like we said, you get to see the real like meaningful payoff from the jumping, but also you get to see like how how valuable jumping can be, right? Like Yuji and Todo together, it doesn't feel like it's like you're multiplying strength. It kind of feels like exponential. Like it's so much more what they can do when they're together. And I think it's kind of like what you see again and again later on in the story, right? More and more is that it's what these sorcerers can do coming together and the great feats they can accomplish like together, especially like you said, like Yuji was broken. It makes the jumping feel like the X factor. It's like an intangible. It's something, it's like a stat that you can't really account for in terms of like number value, but it's something that you can see in performance, right? Because Yuji is somebody else before Todo shows up and then after Todo shows up, right? And I that definitely, means something, right?
Todo giving Yuji like the building his foundation back up. It's still kind of shaky, and Yuji does have to kind of go through like a stagnant moment as a human being and an individual, not valuing himself as a human life. Remember, that's why Enchan worked. You know what I mean? He didn't value his life enough. Sukuna's gamble was literally about Yuji putting value in his own life. I think that's why the jujutsu jumpings are so like important to the story, because the big moments like happen within that dynamic a lot of times.
Oh, dude, 100%. Like now you're cooking because it's almost like a transformation of that perception, right? Like at first, the way Megumi and Yuji's mindset and what you see from these sorcerers, it's like they're all cogs in a machine, right? And everybody just kind of has to put in a little bit from their part to kind of make up this oiled machine and ultimately like sacrifice themselves and just do it for something greater than themselves. But that whole thing by the Shinjuku Showdown, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but it's taken like a completely different meaning that's obviously reflected through Yuji's monologue towards Sukuna at the end. But it's not just that everybody's a cog that makes up this oil, like this machine, but like everybody is their own thing, who has something to offer, and they're valuable in themselves, right? Like forming part of something bigger or not.
The next one, the jujutsu jumping we're all eagerly waiting for in season 3, Maki versus the Zen'in. Yeah, she might have went there on her own volition. She did get jumped by a bunch of incels, and I could tell they probably smell like asparagus and wet pennies just by the look of them. But those bums got what they deserved.
Yeah, there was no Jump Kaisen there. They were just jumping and they failed. Like it's.
There was slaughter. That's a slaughter Kaisen right there, because they couldn't even attempt. They were like trying to start the jumping, and then they got jumped by one woman.
Yeah, and there's nothing there, like that's why I say like they don't even deserve the title. They just tried to jump and failed.
In a not so glamorous fight, but I think it's one of like the more entertaining jujitsu fights, Megumi versus Reggie and his band of bums. What I love here is Megumi stabbed a dude in the forehead just with a straight knife.
Yeah, definitely Megumi's coldest moment. Not that there's that many to pick from, right? But yeah, it's definitely a bad look when you can't jump a 16-year-old, you know.
Yeah, and that 16-year-old also happens to be Megumi, right?
Yeah.
Alright, so now we got Sendai, another exciting for Culling Games anime coming up. But this is a different kind of jumping, because it's technically a 1v1v1, but the fact of Uro and Ishigori, like, they kind of a silent agreement to make Yuta the priority target. They're still like SWAT, they'll still attack each other, but mostly it's like, let's aim our attacks at Yuta. But to be fair though, Rika is also a factor here, kind of an equalizer. I mean, it's up to you if you want to consider that like a jujitsu jump, because in that scenario, it's almost like a 2v2, but not necessarily. I just personally view Rika as a part of Yuta. So it's like one, it's just Yuta and they're jumping him. And I don't blame them for jumping him.
Yeah, whichever way you look at it, like they're attached at the hip basically. There's no way you could separate Yuta, from Rika, whichever way you want to slice it or look at it. I'll get to that in a minute.
We can in Modolo.
Yeah, well, that's true. Right?
We can't have old bitch.
Neither of them are around, but
that's
yeah, in terms of Ryu and Uro, it's not much of a jumping because, like you said, it's a one-on-one, but they do have kind of like that unspoken agreement, and I do think it's funny how like, Yuta just kind of gets on their nerves, so they kind of agree. It is funny that Yuta is just annoying like that.
And next, we have poor Naoya getting jumped by a monster, a sumo fanatic, a sword freak, and a meat shield. This one was a little bit lackluster of a jumping, if we're being real. But I think like Maki's awakening moment, like more than made up for like the two gooners joining the fight.
Yeah, again, it feels like these jumpings in the Cullen games kind of end up building towards something bigger, or like it kind of starts off as a jumping and then ends up building towards like a more individual moment, like we saw with Megumi, that it kind of starts as a jumping from the ops part, but it ultimately turns into a 1v1 and he gets to pop his domain and arguably have his best moment. I don't think that's really arguable. And then in terms of Maki, again, it's she's the one doing the jumping, but it ultimately is just to kind of set the stage for her to be able to blossom into being able to defeat Naoya. So I do like how the Cullen games, it doesn't really take away the the purpose and the meaning behind the jumping, but just kind of uses it to set up something else.
No, it's just weird. There's a lot in that colony that I just like have issues with. But when Maki threw the sword to Daido, I did enjoy that part. I was like, oh, this motherfucker is got like, he's putting that pressure. He's cutting a curse and he can't even see it. I did think that was cool. I did think Miyo was going to be a bigger part, like within the 1 month time skip. How his simple domain works. Perfect for training.
Oh yeah, that is a good point. And in terms of like Naoya's human form, Poppy got again, I do wonder if like at that point he was already kind of doing numbers on the popularity pool, because it really does feel like just a random excuse to
fan service.
Back. yeah. At least like, because it is a bit jarring when we see him again.
I think this might be the most underrated jumping in the series. Yuki and Choso jumping Kenjaku, the fight for Tengen, basically.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I would say it's just so many fights in Jujutsu Kaisen that it feels fair to say that this is among the more underrated fights. But it's also such a good fight that does get its flowers, because every so often, yeah, like people do talk about it and recognize, it's the one Yuki fight. And despite not really, like popping a domain or really winning, like I do think she puts up a good showing. She was obviously going up against Kenjaku. But it does feel like this is kind of like a return to form in terms of the jumping. Like this does feel like, going back to the more traditional, Jump Kaisen sequences that we were seeing earlier in the story. Um, that's just what I think.
No, that's a very, very good shout. Because look at it like this. The narrative weight of this fight and the implications really is everything. Like they could have ended it there. By the way, why didn't Yuki pop her domain after Kenjaku's got taken down?
Could she? I'm assuming she couldn't.
I don't know why she wouldn't be able to. Maybe I'm forgetting something, to be fair. Neither here nor there. I think a really fun fight. Choso being able to like reborn as a human, like Yuki giving him like the keys to a new life, essentially, and saying, you know, it's okay to live your life. You know, it's just, there's a lot of like emotion, especially when he's getting his ass handed to him by Kenjaku in the very beginning with his brothers and all that. And now Yuji's a part of like that thought. It's very, very, I mean, he of course had Yuji in his thoughts anyway, but now the next one though, this is the one I think is the one that hurts the worst. Sukuna versus Yuji and Maki. You know, fresh off of the Enchan. I'm not including Angel in this because I mean, like, come on, really? You know, Sukuna's doing some like devious work though. He hijacked Yuji's homie's body. He then put him through a building, sent him flying, cut him all up in that amazing spread. And then he ended it with roasting Yuji as he left a free man laughing in his face, cooking him.
Yeah, dude. I remember this stretch of chapters. Just, you know, it definitely caught the whole fan base, reader base off guard. Like this whole stretch of chapters, you just had to be there, right? Like
chills.
Chills for sure. Here it's you know, with Sukuna kind of getting his way, it kind of feels like when Mahito was also getting his way, and in a similar way to how like Todo showed up you know, against Mahito. Obviously this is completely different, but Maki showed up to help Yuji, right? And you know, we know how important that was, right? Because even though Megumi was fighting from within, which is, I don't know if you want to add that to the jumping, you know, because that's
right. My man was a part of it.
All right. So that's also kind of funny because he was, you know, the one interrupting Sukuna's output. So yeah, it just starts to feel like those earlier jumpings, and yeah, even Sukuna kind of getting his way and leaving with the last laugh for the moment definitely leaves like a bad taste in all of our mouths, you know, going forward.
You talk about the earlier jumpings and thinking about it, how, you know, bringing up the Mahito one, Mahito took Nobara away from Yuji and Shibuya, then Sukuna just took Megumi away from Yuji, and you know, it's Yuji's a different person at this point. His hate for Sukuna is just like throttling at this point. Like, I think there is and maybe this is just me and how I experienced Jujutsu Kaisen, but the events of Shibuya affected like the state of Jujutsu society. The events of chapter 212 were like, obviously had implications for like the whole society, but it was more like directly like the perspective through Yuji. Because in 214, the first panels are of Yuji walking up to the skyscraper, looking up as like Angel gets flung, and the art just feels different. It feels like visceral. Like there's so much emotion in Yuji's face, and that's where we like notice like, oh wait, Yuji is still like a monster even without Sukuna in him now. So like there's so much going on, and like the Maki inclusion you mentioned earlier in the video about her using him as a cursed weapon was fire. Yeah, it's just all around. This one hurt the worst because it just hit all like the deepest spots of Yuji. We're all really invested in Yuji, so this one hurt.
Yeah, and it had been a minute since Sukuna got like the last laugh, you know? Like again, it feels like we revert back to like the early season or the early stage of the story where it was kind of like all about dealing with Sukuna. We kind of step away from that throughout the story, and we start going back to it towards the end, and in a lot of ways other things start kind of falling back into place and feel kind of reminiscent of the earlier parts of the story as well. So yeah,
you're right. Like Sukuna was kind of just chilling honestly, for like a while. Like after Shibuya, we don't see Sukuna until like the Fallen thing.
Exactly.
Yuji was like really like trying to help Megumi out. You know what I mean? Like he cared to like save Sumiki. Like we even see when they get the points and they're about to make their like rule change, Yuji's thoughts are like, all right, we're gonna save Sumiki. This helps him. Da 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 da. Like then that way we can get Gojo out, and then I can die. Like Yuji was like just like ready to get rid of Sukuna and die. And he was like really seeing this thing through. So I think that's why this jumping just hurt the worst because of like what initiated the jumping of Chan.
And last thing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Papa.
Yeah, last thing I'll say is that like if this doesn't happen, like Yuji isn't able to like be forced to gain a different perspective on life, because like you just said, that was right before Megumi gets taken. Like up to that point, Yuji was ready to sacrifice himself as a cock. It's only when Megumi gets taken and he's now kind of like from the outside looking in, now that he's no longer Sukuna's vessel, that like he gains this completely new perspective on life that ultimately enables him to save Megumi. But it doesn't happen without this moment. And I've even said it before, like what Sukuna says to Sukuna in regards to like his grandpa in 265, I think it is, it's a response to what Sukuna asked him in 216 it is, when he says like, why do humans cling on to life? Like, why don't you just stifle up your misery? Like, why do people that are weak, like, cling on to life like they deserve it? Like, again, I'm paraphrasing. And Yuji kind of stays with that. Like, he leaves with that, right? And he gains this newfound perspective by the end of the story. But that doesn't happen again if Sukuna doesn't get his way here.
Adversity hit him like a motherfucker in 212. But he resolved himself and, he came back strong. Because like maybe it wasn't handled the best after that, like the month time skip. I think Gege was trying to like get us, the reader, in the perspective of like Yuji in that world. We're on a need to know basis. Gege will fill us in when he wants us to know like the information, just like they were doing with Yuji. I mean, we can move on. I just want to say, unpopular opinion here, but the truth is Gojo jumped Sukuna first. He got with Gakuganji and Utahime. He started that 3v1 shit. Well, actually, he went up to like a 4v1 with Ijichi. So like, Sukuna was in the right to get it back in blood with his 3v1. That was like belonging to the curse technique, and the vessel he had.
All is fair in love and war, And hey, Gojo had no problem, doing the sneak at first, because he didn't just, jump, like do the first jumping, right? But he also tried to get it with the
strongest attack he's ever thrown.
Yeah. So I thought that was a neat thing.
We get to see Utahime's ability, and we get to see like Gakuganji involved, that old, skin bag. He might be better as a coat rack, actually. Because now that we know in Modolo, it seems like the toxic cycle has already like clung back on to Jujutsu Society. We know Gakuganji was the one that was like left in charge. Yeah, he's old and he probably only had about like 5 years.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
I'm still blaming the bitch ass. But the Gojo Sukuna thing, like, obviously memeing a bit, but technically it is true. Gojo did throw, and there's nothing underhanded about what Gojo did, by the way. We're not saying that. We're just saying Gojo technically did the slimy shit first. Technically, Sukuna did take over his like adopted son's body, but we're not gonna mention that. All right, and then like we have the year-long gauntlet of jumping Sukuna with a bunch of different people, a bunch of different intervals.
Wait.
We have someone from Africa that came in.
Yeah, I just want to say, I know this is obviously like, it's probably not even worth mentioning, right? But it's, there's also obviously, the 3v1 with Maharaga and Agita, right? Like, I know we just completely brushed over that one because it's been memed to death and talked about to death. But yeah, just wanted to mention it before we moved on to the Shinjuku Showdown.
Yeah, no, true. And like, we kind of like tiptoed around that for sure. But I mean, the 3V, like we kind of also brought up about the Yuta and Rika thing. Like the 10 Shadows, that's the vessel Sukuna was in. So belongs with the curse technique.
I hear you. Exactly. No, that makes sense. And yeah, man, the year long Shinjuku showdown. Where do we even start? Like,
honestly, it's just, I think it was just exciting. We don't need to really talk about any specific, because we know like Kenjaku gets snuck. Like obviously like Yuta and Yuji in the domain with against Sukuna. The real big highlight is the Todo like reemergence, right?
Yeah.
Or at least I think in the sense of Yuji and like the importance of the narrative importance. Because obviously Yuta was like massively important, so was Maki. Even LaRue and Ino, it was a concerted effort. Exactly. The weak banded together and defeated the strong. Like that's why Sukuna was able to like, realign his like way of thinking, because Yuji proved him wrong. Sukuna just thought, it doesn't matter what tricks you throw at me, it doesn't matter how many you use, because to Sukuna, he's just above it all. So he doesn't consider none of it cheating. Like he's just above that, but he got, proven wrong.
You talked about like the Dagon fight doing a lot for like the power system in terms of just kind of playing on things that would be expanded on later or referenced later. We saw a little bit of that with Falling Blossom, whatever it's called.
Falling Blossom Emotion,
yeah. So, when Gojo used that against Sukuna, obviously like Naobito had been the one we saw using it before. And for this fight, it just feels like, Todo coming back in a similar way that he had against Mahito, the way Nobara comes back after last being seen in Shibuya. It handled so well, right? But just the way like everybody comes together, and like you said, even whichever way you may feel about the 1 month time skip, the way everything was executed, the way but the way that the power system and what we know about it is used to kind of bring the story now full circle and fire at all cylinders and just wrap everything once and for all. I just think it's really well done, because it's nothing that we hadn't seen before in the story. And by that point, I just think everything comes together really well. Maki's contributions, Yuta's contributions, like you said, from just Miguel and LaRue to like even Uyui, like Nanami was from the grave, like with this cursed tool, like
hit him once for me.
Yeah, the whole thing, man, just peak. And you can really tell, like, even if Gege wasn't 100%, even if there's some things that he didn't execute the way people would have preferred, you can tell that he can really put his all into this fight, right? Because you can tell like the amount of passion that went into it and the amount of like consideration and care behind the week to week and every development, each chapter, whether it was Yuji's growth, whether it was like Yuta pulling up, whether it was Maki getting Sukuna riled up. The whole thing was just really cool to see,
Yeah,
we could be here for a whole nother hour just on this fight.
That ass. But honestly, you kind of like nailed it. The thing with this is all the prior jumpings and Yuji's like journey, like he validates those. The payoffs happen here. Indomitable will that Yuji has was about to be broken when the Fuga hit and he didn't see anybody. But Todo appearing and just telling him like, I used my technique, they should be all right. Yuji has enough faith in Todo to believe in him. And, it's the prior jumpings that what Todo's done for him in those other fights, why he can believe Todo. You know what I mean? That's why it's like so important to like have that. That's why Jump Kaisen is essential, because it is really the through point for all the themes Gege is trying to get through to us. We're trying to like convey in the story, excuse me. It's just a huge part of the story that I think is like one anime or one manga series where it does feel organic. The fact that the main character doesn't have so many like solo battles, and maybe that's why I like it. Something different. It may not be for you, but I personally love it.
Yeah, brother, honestly, there's not like I think you wrapped it up perfectly. There's nothing else I could add, to especially that last point you just made. I agree.
You
I
could
think
add details about your channel.
well, look, I'll just say that I agree. I think what you just stated is exactly why I think Jump Kaisen is essential and why it's ultimately such an integral. It's a big part of why Jujutsu Kaisen is what it is. It's kind of built in its essence, right? So, yeah, man, 100%. In terms of me, my channel, The Divine Dice, check it out.
What you got cooking up next, Dice?
We're finally gonna get another modulo video up pretty soon, and bocce content should be cooking with those
Wait,
soon.
bocce? Aren't you on a podcast for Kagurabachi? I heard you I heard y'all's podcast be putting seeds in people.
Yeah, well, look, I'm trying to get rid of that rumor going around.
We're trying to readjust our brand.
Yeah, check out the Hishaku Hideout podcast, guys. The best bocce podcast.
That's right. No, it is. That's the best source of Kagurabachi content. And I do love the memes around, Jump Kaisen. It's an integral part to the series. We've said it a bunch of times. I kind of like this long discussion format. Let me know in the comment section how you guys liked it. Stay normie, stay weeb. Shit, even in between is fine. Until next time. Peace.
Peace.